Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Reese and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off today's session in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting so everyone has a chance to join. In the meanwhile though, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know where you're joining from and what you'd like to get out of today's webinar in the chat and the comments, depending on what platform you're watching on. A few bits of housekeeping before we get into the session. The session is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to you in the next few days. We are going to have an audience Q&A at the end of the session, but if you have any questions at any point throughout the session, then please let us know in the comments and the chat and I will save your question for you. If you have anything aside from questions, actually, where am I going with this? Sorry. In the chat, I'm going to be posting links to resources that will be relevant for this session today. So make sure you keep your eyes peeled in the chat. I've also just posted a link so you can register for today's event in the chat as well. So if you register, we can send you the recording as well as any other resources that we share with the audience today. And if you stay to the end as well, we'll be sharing the slides that we're going to be referencing throughout the session as well. So yeah, 3 things. Please do let us know where you're joining from in the comments. Register for the event. You can do that by scanning the QR code on screen, heading to the link that I've sent in the chat, or heading to datacamp.com/webinars. And you can also keep an eye out for the resources that I'll be sending out in the chat. Brilliant. That's everything from me for the moment. I will be back shortly to repeat these messages for any new joiners. But until then, enjoy the background music. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Reese and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off today's session in about a minute or so. We're just waiting so everyone has a chance to join. In the meanwhile though, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know where you're joining from using the chat or the comments, depending on what platform you're watching on. A few bits of housekeeping for anyone that's just joined. The session is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to you in the next few days. We are going to have an audience Q&A at the end of the session, so if you have any questions at any point throughout the session, let us know in the comments and I will save your question for the Q&A. Also, keep an eye in the chat for any resources that I'll be sharing during the session. These are going to be relevant to what we're talking about today. And finally, if you haven't registered for this event already, please do, and we will send you the recording as well as any other resources. You can do that by scanning the QR code on screen, heading to datacamp.com/webinars, or you can find the link that I've put in the chat as well. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Reese and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off the session in about 20 seconds or so. We're just waiting for the last few people to join. Let us know where you're joining from and tell us something that you'd like to get out of today's webinar. A few bits of housekeeping for anyone that's just joined. The session is being recorded and the recording will be emailed to everyone that's registered in the next few days. If you haven't registered already, scan the QR code on screen, head to datacamp.com/webinars, or find the link that I've put in the chat. Also, if you have any questions at any point throughout the session, please let us know in the chat. We are going to be doing an audience Q&A, so if you have any questions about how this applies to you and your work, then let us know in the chat. Also, keep your eye in the comments in the chat, as I'll be sharing resources that will be relevant to what we're talking about as well. Brilliant. I think that's everything from me. So now I'll hand you over to your host for today's session, Richie. Richie, please take it away.
Welcome to the webinar. This is Richie. So as you might imagine, we are big fans of data literacy here at DataCamp. And this is the idea that regardless of your job title, it's just a really good idea to have some basic data skills. Now, individuals learning data skills is one thing, but when it comes to trying to educate everyone in an organization, there are some additional challenges. So, for example, you need to figure out who needs what skills, you need to figure out how to make sure everyone has time to learn at work, and you need to make sure that the skills that people do learn then get applied in people's jobs. So, all tricky stuff, but fortunately, we have an expert to help us out today to figure out the details. Ed Barker is the Learning and Development Lead at GM Defense. He's also a two-time data camp admin. So he previously ran a data training program at Guardian Industries before moving to GM and doing the same thing again. He's also been a long-time champion of data literacy in the workplace. So I am very keen to get his insights. Welcome to the webinar, Ed.
Thank you. Exciting to talk about this topic.
Absolutely.
Excited to get started.
Yeah, let's do this. All right, I like the enthusiasm. Okay, so to begin with, just to make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about, how do you define data literacy?
Sure. So, data literacy, big topic, right? But for most corporations, what we're trying to do is just make people aware of what's possible with data analytics. Most of the data literacy concepts is really aimed at that group, right? At our business individuals. So defining data literacy is really just elevating the awareness of what's possible with data. We're not trying to make everybody a data scientist, and sometimes that's the mistake that we make. That's a potential possibility, but not everybody is ready for that level of training. So just making people aware of what's possible and how to communicate.
Okay, I like that. Just being aware of what's possible, so you can get ideas for. Oh, yeah, maybe this is a project we should take part in. So I suppose related to that, you mentioned that what the sort of general worker needs is different from a data scientist. Would you start a data literacy program like with the data professionals, with those data analysts and data scientists, or would you start with everyone else?
So good question, and it really depends on what your goal is. So when you very start, when you get the job, let's say you're going to have a set of requirements, and your requirements may be, we want to teach the whole company to be data literate, or drive a data-driven culture. And we've all heard these keywords, but depending on the requirements, and you have to be bold here. You have to really ask your leadership, what are we trying to accomplish? And in most organizations, it's not really educating those who already know. It's more educating the people who don't know, so that when they do go into conversations about issues at work, right, or opportunities for AI, ML, that they're aware again of what's possible. And when they're communicating with the data scientists, they're having a good level of fluency, right? So, you know, most tech people want to talk techie. And a lot of times you'll be the business person sitting on the other side of the table and you're shaking your head, right? Because you don't want to be the person to sound like you don't know what they're talking about. And that has led to a high level of projects failing, right? And that's what we want to avoid. So at most companies, our goal is to level up the knowledge, not so much on the technical side, like the IT side and data scientists, but more on the business side. Um, and I have a good slide that helps present this a little bit. So when we talk to our leadership, we understand the goal of what we're trying to do. And your goal can vary, right? It could be we want the entire organization of 19,000 people to be data literate, or your goal could be we want to have accounting and finance develop more skills so they can find more opportunities. But either way, your data literacy goal is going to be at the top here. And what our assumption, right, our data literacy assumption, what we assumed people know, is more in this little gray bar down here. Now, what I did at one company is we broke down the groups into what we call personas, and I think everybody's probably comfortable with the grouping concept of
Oh,
personas.
well, maybe do you want
But
to
based
just
on the
give a quick explanation for people who don't know the difference? So, what's the difference between a owner
sure,
and a person?
yeah, when I first started, I had the hardest time trying to figure out how am I going to get all these various levels of people to all be at the same level of fluency. And we had our data scientists, we had our heavy IT data warehouse people, we had, as you can imagine, marketing and communication and salespeople, all at various levels. So this is where, kind of giving you guys a plug on Data Camp, where Data Camp really came into to be very handy. For example, Persona 1 would have been our data scientists. They're not far from the goal, right? Persona 2, maybe that's IT. Persona 6, that could be our executive leadership, right? Now they don't have to have that deep knowledge that we expect from, let's say, our business Persona 4, right? But getting to these groups, these personas, allows you to understand, okay, the people in accounting are on average at this level of skill, and I need to raise their skill from here to where our goal is. And again, through learning management systems, like Data Camp, you can create that course, that curriculum, to help them achieve this goal. Right now, their classes that they take will be different from, say, the executives. And when you're looking at these, at Data Camp, at learning management systems, you want to be sure that you're allowed to create custom paths that help facilitate this. When I first started, we were doing this in classes that we created on our own, and that was painful. there was there was n- there wasn't enough time to do the classes, right? By the time you went all through production and built the class and created the tool, um, and that's where we started reaching out to Data Camp and companies like that, like Data Science Dojo, and that's where our success started to take off, because the tracking of the classes, the testing, the practice already exists inside of this tool. And so that's a huge help to have a tool like that when you're trying to educate the different personas. um, yep.
Okay, that seems pretty helpful. And from this diagram, it looks pretty simple. Just for each group of employees, you go from where they are now to whatever their goal is. Just give a learning path for each one. Sounds straightforward. So I guess the devil's in the details. Let's go into this. And so to begin with, you mentioned goals a few times there. So can you just talk me through
Yes.
what are some common sort of well, first of all, what are the motivations for doing a data literacy program, and then what are the goals of a typical data literacy program?
Sure. So the motivation is that right now in industry, we are all being held to be more competitive, right? We need to move away from emotional. I don't want to say it's completely move away, but we want to move away from emotional decision making to be more data driven. There's a lot of push in the past, several years about become a data driven company, and that's completely possible. And that every aspect of business needs to be driven by data, but we can incrementally do more in our decision making with data. So to get there, to get to this data literacy goal, to have people starting to use data, or understand how to use data, there's a couple steps that we can take. The very first thing, and this is critical, is you have to truly understand what leadership thinks this is, what they think data literacy is. And all too often, they're influenced by outside resources, right? Whether it be social media or their friends, or other companies that they admire. That may not be the same thing. So one of the very first things that you want to do is try to understand the requirements, not just of the person who put you in the position, but of the people that are also on that leadership role. And what I did in the past is, I took the requirements, I created a nice single slide, because you're not going to get much of their time or attention, a quick little 5-minute slide. And I asked them, do you agree with this? Or what are your thoughts on this? Kind of open ended questions to get a better understanding of what is their thought, right? Um, Kind of going to put a shout out for a narrative. Um, when putting together this slide, you're trying to tell a story in one page. And when you talk to the leadership, again, you're only going to get a few minutes of their time. So you want to be very concise. You want that narrative to really hit home, and every leader is going to be a little bit different. So you may have to change the message. The other thing that helps us understand our goals is doing assessments, not just assessments of one particular group, but and what I mean by an assessment, I guess, is sitting down, creating a series of questions. You can use Microsoft Forms to push it out, but creating that survey, that assessment, to try to understand the organization's the entire organization, their thoughts on what where they are, where they could be, what they could do better. When I did my first assessment, it's it was handy because I was able to work closely with Gartner to have them help out with the questions. No, we didn't use all of their questions, but we took a few of them and put them into an assessment to understand, what are your thoughts on machine learning, AI, data structures, where do you think your data quality is for the organization? And again, this is just trying to understand our current state. Where are we right now? The third thing that was very helpful in this process was a maturity model. And when I was, I used to write software and build databases. Never did I think about maturity models, but in this role, the maturity model and the method to understand it is critical. Now, it's not a huge group, right? You get a collaborative group and make sure you include the business in this, and you start to ask the questions. And DataCamp has a nice maturity model that I stumbled across a few weeks ago that I'm using at my current role to help understand again what is our current state. And the thing here is try not to be biased. And it's very easy for us to want to, well, we're doing pretty good in data quality. And that's where having a collaborative group can really help, because guarantee you people in accounting may have a different opinion of the data that they use, or operations or sales. So you want to be sure you have a good collaborative group. And so that's kind of maybe the secret. One of the secrets is getting the requirements from your leadership, being sure to not only ask the person who put you in charge, but ask other leaders around the organization. And every organization is different. The company that I started out was 19,000 people globally, large organization, big global footprint, but that's not the case for everybody. Your assessment doesn't have to be 100 questions, right? It could be 20 questions, just again to give you the understanding of what are the pain points, all right? Where do people feel that they are? And again, the maturity model. So you take all three of these things, you pull them together, and you start to understand, okay, where are we in our current state? And just a side note, you're going to want to reassess and do this again in 6 to 12 months, right? To understand, are we making progress? Which leads me into this next question, because I was asked this, you go down to grab lunch, or you go, to the cafeteria, and a leader will come up and say, "Oh, congratulations on your new role. How are we doing?" And, I used to start by, "Oh, we're doing good." Well, that's not, that's not very helpful. I don't think that's what they really wanted to hear. What they probably wanted to hear is, "Oh, we have the assessments. We're 20% into our plan. We have that excitement that way," and that works.
Hang on, you're just breaking up a bit there.
Okay.
We just lost you. Okay, hang on. There's quite a lot to unpack there, so let me just try and summarize, just to make sure everyone's caught
Sure.
up. So, all right. So we're talking about the motivations, and it seems like the most common motivation is going to be, let's try and increase people's productivity. Let's try and make sure that people are not just sat in a meeting, not understanding things. And then it seems like what you're going to do in your program is going to depend on the existing level of maturity of data capabilities. So if you got a lot of people who are data like experts, then that's going to be a very different program to if nobody has any data skills to begin with.
Right.
You also mentioned the idea of an assessment. So just to be clear on this, is this something that is like an exam, like testing people's data skills, or is this something that's just more like a survey where you're
More
asking
like a
them?
survey. Yeah.
Like, what are their opinions? What do they need from data?
Yeah, initially it's more like a survey. Whenever I use the assessment, probably generically, and when I used it at one company, everybody got nervous because they thought they were going to be tested on it. And I'm like, no, probably a bad term to use. Again, which highlights fluency and right using the right words is important. So it is a survey. You're trying to understand, where are the pain points and how can we help? You know.
Okay. And then maybe you can talk through some success stories that you've had in your previous data training programs. So
Sure.
basically, are there any new projects that your colleagues have been able to take on because they have new skills, or are there any examples of increased productivity or other benefits like that?
Yes. So we want to I have two good examples. I'll take that back. Um, when we're doing this program, this was a couple companies ago. Uh, One of the groups that we worked with was corporate communications, and they have a lot of data, but they didn't know what to do with it, right? And they produce marketing material every month. They try to, you know, again, just typical corporate communications, right? Keeping everybody elevated. But what they didn't know is how well they were doing, right? Or which type of communication was being more effective. And for anybody online, your mind's going, all right, A/B testing, right? So, um, or I think Richie, you have a different term for that that I heard earlier. But
Oh,
anyway,
for
so
A/B testing. Oh,
yeah,
it's sometimes called champion challenger testing.
yeah,
That's a less.
yeah.
Yeah, some finance people use that, but A/B testing is the more producty term.
Yeah, so that face off of which one's going to do better. Um, and so when we went through this program, when they went through the way we had it is we did this in data camp to get a base foundation. Then we would take them into a oh my gosh, losing my word there into a work center, kind of to be able to do the work, um, a project, right? And for this team, what we decided on was to do this project on how effective is our communication between this type of approach and this other type of approach. Now, working through this workshop, that's the word I wanted to use, this workshop, we also brought in our data scientists, not so much to do the work for them, but to help mentor them. And so they built their baseline. They started the work. Um, we ran to an issue where the data scientists actually had to jump in and help us a little bit with some of the A/B testing. But the end result was that we were finding that the hit rate or the communication was being more effective if we had more visuals in it, right? Um, so so that was a success, and I'm kind of talking generically about the opportunity because I only can say so much about what it was, but they realized how to be more effective in their marketing material, which means that the time spent is more effective. They also realized that the average person only spent 5 to 10 seconds on an article before they left, and this is all critical information, right? Because if I know that I only have a few seconds to grab someone's attention, I'm going to change the way I'm communicating it. I'm not going to start off with a long narrative. Um, so that was beneficial for them. The other group was accounting, and this group was faced with a challenge that month end is challenging for a lot of accounting groups. It's a stressful period. It's more stressful when people don't get their numbers in on time, and this continuous pattern was happening month over month over month. So we decided, let's do a workshop on this. Again, same pattern. People went through the training to get the base level knowledge. We pulled in a workshop with our data scientists. We gathered the data, went through that whole process, right? Um, and we were able to determine that the issue with the month in and the late wasn't, or we figured out where it was. So we were able to change that group's behavior to make month end more successful. Now, it doesn't always has to be monetary, right? We don't always have to make monetary gains, because we also can improve people's fulfillment at work. And if you're in accounting and all the information is coming to you and you have it all ready for month end, and you only have to spend 5 days instead of 10 days trying to do a close, that's much better. It's a lot less stressful. Your fulfillment is higher. So we shouldn't focus on, how do we save $1 million? We also should focus on people's fulfillment when it comes to these different types of projects. But the implementation is the same pattern, right? You work with the people, you understand what they're, where they sit with their knowledge. You augment that with learning, again, like a tool like DataCamp, or if you have classes already built that can fill that. And then you go into a project, because all we did initially was elevate the awareness. Now we want to get them hands-on, and getting the hands-on and doing the work is where you really learn, right? That's what we retain a lot better than going through a book and getting that. So having these workshops is critical. Having them with somebody who has knowledge, like a data scientist or IT or whoever it is in your organization, is also important, right? Because you don't want to make that mistake at the beginning and people are like, "Oh, I don't know how to do this. This is too difficult." Um, we want it to be as successful as it can, but failures are also successes, right? As long as we learn from them. So,
I like that failures are also successes. I'm going to try that on my next performance review as well.
right, right. I didn't want to say anything out loud, but hopefully my face.
All right. So, yeah, again, so there's a lot of very cool points there. So, I really like the example where you're trying to improve marketing capabilities and just being able to go from, oh, I don't know how to get better, to, oh, there's a real framework for this. It's called A/B testing, and
Right.
now I can have a go at this and improve my performance. Is brilliant. And then also the accounting example where they're wanting to automate things to just manage a difficult period of, like, well, we're doing a load of month-end reporting and we have to do this every month and it's always a nightmare. So that's excellent. One thing you mentioned was this idea that you were combining DataCamp courses with doing an in-classroom workshop. So this sounds like a flipped classroom approach. So I'm not, for anyone in the audience who isn't familiar with the terminology, the idea is, often in school you have your class and then you do your homework afterwards. The flipped classroom is where you do your homework beforehand. So in this case, like, the homework is like your DataCamp course. Then everyone comes into the workshop with this base level of understanding, and it means when everyone's in a room together, you can start working on the more advanced problems. So maybe Ed, can you just tell me a bit more about, like, why you decided on that flipped classroom approach and how you went about combining the online courses with the workshops?
Right. So that approach, we kind of have to be realistic with what we're doing, and I think I have a pretty good slide on this if you want to show that. So when we're working with the different teams, we have to be realistic that, this is not, not everybody's going to spend 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours at work. They have their commitment that's usually engineering or operations. Um, you know, Actually almost every role nowadays is your day's packed, and you don't really have time for learning something new. So unless learning something new is actually part of what you need to do, right? It creates that efficiency. So to save time, we could have sent everybody through the course, and I even worked with universities on this program, and they're like, "Oh, in 6 months." I'm like, "Well, 6 months is too long, right? I'm not going to be able to get that kind of commitment from somebody." But taking 5 minutes out of the day during lunch or 10 minutes here and going through a section or a chapter inside of a learning management system or a tool like DataCamp, that is feasible. So when they get that, and this is where my mind was, is I need them to be ready to perform, right? Ready to communicate effectively with data scientists, to look at the project with more awareness. So it just kind of this type of homework has to be first, and then we'll be more efficient when we start doing the project, right? Or we start doing the workshop. Um, and if we look at some of the tools like Alteryx and Data IQ and um, Tableau, it's the same concept. You still need to go into utilizing these tools with a base level of knowledge. And if you understand the core principles of AI, machine learning, and different models, it's going to make it so much more effective, and you're going to have um, success rate. You're gonna be more happy when doing it. That fulfillment's going to be there. So, this paradigm seems to work great in my scenarios that I've been in. Now, as you can imagine, there's a ton of different scenarios, and not everything fits everybody.
Absolutely. So I love some of the examples on here, and it does seem like making sure that people actually complete whatever training you're offering to them is one of the hard things. So there's a few sort of stages to this. And I think adoption is maybe the beginning point of this. So suppose you've set up a new training program, you've decided who needs to take part, and then some people come back to you and say, actually, no, sorry, I can't do this training. So first of all, like, what are the most common excuses people give? And then secondly, like, how do you handle those objections? How do you make sure that people actually start taking the training you're offering?
Right. So this is where leadership has to come into play. There are multiple ways to handle it. Your goal is to implement a framework for data literacy. Adoption is important, but not everybody, like you mentioned, not everybody's going to have time or be willing to do this. So leadership has to make it a priority, and they have to communicate out this message that this leads us to be data driven and it creates value, right? Um, what you want to be aware of is the 20% of the people who are excited about doing this, right? And the people who are excited about it will create value. When they create value by taking the classes, doing the workshop, coming up with a project that's going to create value, and then you communicate that out to the corporation, right? People like to be part of a successful thing. So these people who are like, oh, I don't have time, they start to see these successes come through however you communicate it out, and they want to be part of it, right? Now that's not going to be the solution for everybody. You're going to have some people that just, they just don't want to do it, and that's okay. One thing we have to be is kind of realistic, is if you're in a company that is, like the first company I tried this at with 19,000 people, it's going to be very challenging to get everybody interested in it, because leadership has to look at the opportunity cost. What is the cost of this individual doing this or doing that, right? And sometimes leadership decides that doing that is more important than doing this, which is, I think, is kind of short-sighted, because if we elevate the awareness of analytics and data and what we can do, then we become more efficient, right? And we have a potential to do more or create more value. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely, like, there's a short-term cost to learning because it takes time and mental effort, and then there's a long-term benefit because you're going to be more productive. You're going to be able to do new cool things.
Yep. And companies have to be, again, given the landscape of where we are now with corporations globally and the competition, it's very hard to get that competitive advantage, and we have to rely on the people to be innovative. And if we want them to be innovative, we have to give them the skills to be innovative, right? Understand what is possible. And again, that's where data literacy comes in. We can elevate that knowledge, that awareness of what is possible to help become more competitive as an organization. And it's up to leadership to embrace that and help evangelize that across the organization, so that it's not, oh, I marked my check mark for the year, I'm done, right? That's not helping anybody. It's not even helping the person who marked the check mark. So we need to be, all hands on deck type of approach to move forward.
So one thing you mentioned a moment ago was that if you start a new training program, probably you can have 20% of people are really excited. And I love this idea that you've got some champions within your organization then that can be, oh yeah, this is cool stuff. How can you make use of that? Do you have any tips for showing off the work of these people who are excited, or amplifying their excitement somehow?
Yeah. And if we want to show this slide that I'm on now, one of the things that we want to do, you know, as a data literacy lead, as a data literacy group, you are kind of like your own mini consulting group, right? And you have to market what your successes are, just like you were if you were a vendor to the company. So you should have a marketing plan, a communication plan in place to highlight these successes. Obviously you want to have, and then I'm going to skip over the project plan, but down here in the bottom, when we talk about progression, we talk about the training, the workshops, and the services. And it can be multiple different things, right? It could be podcasts, it could be marketing, it could be classrooms that you hold on your own. And the 20% of the people, they're going to be all about this. They're going to be excited about this. There's a course called Data Science for Business. It's actually a book. It's course taught at college, many different colleges. And we we took this book and we said, okay, we're going to do a book club, right? We're going to read a chapter each week. And after everybody, this is kind of midway through the data camp implementation, people are taking classes. I thought we're going to have 10, 15 people in this class. We actually had over 50 people for the very first class and had to create a second class because more people were interested. So there's also a learning part in this mistake I made. When you're an international company, you have to give credence to the language of the book. And this book didn't have the language in Spanish, right? So that just meant that the the people who are attending the course were going to be reading the book slower. So a chapter every week isn't always possible. But there was such excitement about this class and about becoming data driven, and that we got a great response to the class. Now 6 weeks into class, we're on chapter 7. We get past all the conceptual stuff and we start getting into the actual data science part of it. We bring in our data science people to help teach the course, and then we see, the numbers of people drop dramatically. But the 20% were still there, right? They still wanted to know. So these are, like you said, they're going to be our champions, right? And we want to help them out as much as we can to be successful. And then when they are successful, we want to promote that success, right? Not only for them, but also for the program as a whole.
That's excellent. And I love the idea of just having some podcasts as part of your learning program. So it doesn't have to be like, you're spending a long time taking courses and doing something more formal. It can be a case of let's just stimulate my brain a bit and get a few ideas just to kick off, particularly for people who are just wanting some sort of basic data skills. Go on.
So in there, when you do these different things, right, measure everything, right? Measure the number of people that listen to the podcast. Measure their feelings of the podcast. Was it effective? Again, going back to the concept that you are a small business inside of the big company, right? You should try to figure out a way to measure every little thing that you do, right? Because this is going to help you tell the story to your leadership. When they say, "Are we being successful? Are we having an impact? What is our adoption?"
All right. So let's talk about measurement, because that is going to be a common thing when you come to renew your data campus subscription at the end of the year. Maybe your boss is going to say, "Well, did you actually get some value from this?" So talk me through how do you think about measuring the success of a learning program?
Right. So one success is just adoption and completion of the courses, right? And it's a good indicator to say, okay, people are listening, they're taking the courses through data camps that we want. The better measure is how many workshops did we have after these courses, right? How many projects did we do after these courses? They don't have to be successful, but how many projects did we engage in? Do we see this upward trend? Are we changing the mental model of the people to be more analytical than before, right? So we want to measure everything that we do, and different ways we can grab these. You could do interviews, you can do surveys, assessments. It's a wide variety of way we can capture this information, but bringing this all back together at the end, the most critical thing that we can do is practice what we're kind of preaching, right? We're talking about analytics, we're talking about trying to get people to use it. Well, we should be using it ourselves, right? we should know that podcasts do better when they're 5 minutes compared to a podcast that's 10 minutes, right? So we should be collecting our own data and doing our own testing on these different different approaches. Again, because we want to be effective. Now, inside of the tool DataCamp, there's a lot of data and analytics already done for you, which makes it nice. But if you're going to complement that tool with other classroom, other workshops, be sure to measure as much as you can. Measure beforehand, measure after, right? If it's a classroom type environment. So
Absolutely. I like that there are some things that are sort of easy to measure, like how much content did people complete, like how many courses did they complete. And in fact, if you're a dating app admin, you just look at the dashboard and it's going to give those numbers to you automatically. But then some of the stuff like, did it actually have a change in behavior? This is a bit trickier to measure, but it's also really important. So I'm just wondering what techniques you use to measure changes in behavior. Like, do you do surveys, or are there other kind of ways of measuring this sort of thing?
So for me, the focus usually ends up being that we're working with a small group or small capability. So interviewing, right? Not right away. So what happens is when people do the workshop, and they are all excited because they have a project to do, and whether it's positive or negative, that it comes out. If you try to measure that sentiment afterwards, you're result because people are going to be happy, right? I was able to do something and I feel great. So wait a month or two and then come back and okay, let's interview this group, right? How are we doing now with what we taught? Are they still using it? Are they creating value with it? So the immediate response to having a class, sometimes is always favorable. So you want to give it a little bit of time for that excitement, that emotion to come down, and then do your interview. Um, and see how it is. Most groups that I end up doing the interviews with are small groups, right? 10 people, 5 people. So it's not hard to accomplish. If the group gets larger than that, then you have to think of a more creative way probably to get the information. Maybe it's a combination of survey, and interviews. Interview their leader. Are they seeing anything? Are they hearing anything inside the meetings? But it's very exciting. It's also sometimes very time consuming.
After that, is interesting. Your point that you should let people sort of cool off before they start filling any kind of feedback form on, like, was the training any good? It's one of my favorite tricks for like you do some teaching at the end. You get people to high five each other in the class, and then you ask them to fill out the surveys. They're all excited and fired up when they and give you a good review. I know that's cheating. Probably shouldn't do that. Okay. Anyway, so can you talk a bit about more tips for engagement? I think we went from adoption straight through to like, how do you measure the success? We missed out that important bit in the middle on like, how do you get people to build that learning habit? So I think scheduling is maybe the hardest part of this. So do you have any tips around like when people should learn, or how do you manage like that time for learning around
Right.
people's day-to-day jobs?
So everybody learns differently. Everybody learns at different times, different patterns. But the commitment that leadership can make is by making that, understanding that I'm going to set aside 2 hours of every one of my employees' work week, work week for training. This is showing that this is an important task, and the company is willing to sacrifice a few hours for training. And again, using a tool that can monitor the training, you can be sure that they're actually doing the training and not just taking the 2 hours to do additional work, or trying to multitask. So that's one way. The other way is to offer a variety of different approaches. So some people are great when it comes to doing online training. Some people will take first chapter and then I'll do it later. I'll do it later. They'll procrastinate. So you can set up training. I want to call them workshop, but classroom trainings where we all go through this training together, right? So it could be done at lunch. It could be done during a break in the afternoon, but make it nice and short. 30 minutes, right? Let's say 10 minutes for introduction, recap of what you did, 10 minutes to go over a chapter inside of, let's say, DataCamp or a book, and then 10 minutes to kind of reflect on what you learned. 30 minutes, they're done. They could bring their lunches if they want. but make it fun, right? People will adopt it if it's more fun. Um, Making it part of the uh, person's performance, yearly performance. I, expect that you will have accomplished X, Y, and Z within your data literacy training. Again, the leadership in the company are showing that this is important, and you're able to get the better adoption that way. In the end, people, if you could just box in their 8-hour day or 10-hour day, most of it is going to be trying to accomplish what the company needs. And really, you need to make data literacy part of what the company needs, and hopefully, your leadership sees that, because that again will make it a lot more successful and easier to adopt.
I do like that idea that people's training should be built into like quarterly targets or performance reviews, because then there's some sort of official sanctioning from management to say this is something we expect you to do. It's not just oh, you have to do this in your spare time on top
Right.
of all your other targets.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, but we see this in other industries, right? So nursing, education, teachers, they all have to take continuing education courses, right? Continuing learning. So why is it any different from the business? Why shouldn't we have data literacy as a continuing part of our education for the company? Um, yeah, so I like that approach because it's a good balance between the company and the expectations of the individual.
Excellent. And one thing that we've not discussed so far is the actual content. So, for a data literacy program, what sort of skills do you think are important?
Wow. Uh, so first, my mind goes all the way back to the personas. But for literacy, it's important that we build that good foundation of awareness, right? And one of the programs, and I stick to this program even at this current company. Um, we want to have people understand, you know, conceptually, right? Not being a data architect, not being a data scientist, but conceptually, you know, what is data modeling, right? What is data engineering? What is machine learning? What is artificial intelligence? What is a large language model? And most important in all of this is how does data governance impact all of it, right? So data literacy needs to definitely cover those parts. In addition to, data storytelling, how do you effectively communicate? It's not always just, you know, we do the training, we get the AI, we get the results of the data. We still have to communicate that right in an effective way. So that has to be part of it. Basic basic statistics is important, right? Because we want to be able to understand when we're talking to our data scientists, and they're saying, okay, well, the average or the mean or the, whatever, you understand or you can conceptualize what they're talking about. Obviously, through machine learning and AI, you're going to get into different types of models, and understanding how these models work at a conceptual level, again, is important, right? Because that's going to help with the communication, and that's going to help that project be more successful. So those were, I guess, probably what I said, 7 or 6 core classes, right? Or would be important. And I believe inside of the data literacy um, course that's inside of data camp, those are all there, right? Stats, data engineering,
Yeah,
data
so we have
science. Yeah.
a few skill tracks. So these are learning paths designed specifically for data literacy. Maybe Reese can post a link in the chat. So we have a skill track called Data Literacy Professional that takes you from I know nothing about data at all to I have some competency and I can talk comfortably
Yeah.
about it. And then, yeah, there's a data skills for business, I think it's called, skill track that's going to cover things like data engineering and machine learning and some of the slightly more
Yep.
advanced topics. Um,
Yep. And
okay.
I wonder. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, because you talked briefly about personas at the start, about how different groups of people are going to need different skills and have different levels of existing knowledge. One
Right.
thing I'm curious about is how you go about defining those personas in the first place. Like, how do you group your colleagues up according to ability and needs?
So based on how your company is set up, we can group them, right? We know most people in marketing are going to have a similar skill set, we know that most people who are business analysts are going to have a similar skill set: accounting, finance, and so on, right? Sales, organization. So you could group them by that, right? Or again, going back to an assessment, you can group them by assessment. So let's say we were uh, just, we had our understanding accounting wants to move forward with being data literate. So we could do an assessment that's a little bit more technical, right? Asking questions. Do you understand what A/B testing is? Do you understand what a data model does? So we can make it a little bit more difficult. And it's not a pass, and it's not a scoring thing, right? It's just for them to understand, or for you to understand, where do these people sit and what do we need to do to complement what they know to where they need to be. So you're going to take the worst score in that group, right? And you're going to say, okay, they understand basic stats because this was taught in college. They're accounting, so they have a good understanding of, let's say, analytics. So we know that these don't necessarily have to be heavily focused, but we can now focus. Okay, you're going to need data engineering, you're going to need data science, you're going to need machine learning, AI. These are things that are going to help you get to where we want to go. So it's taking that type of practice for each capability, right? And eventually you come out with these different types of personas, and there's not too many of them. I think I was told one time that a company had like 113. I'm like, how do you manage that? That's too many. I had 7 at one company and 9 at another because I include the executives in a certain area. Um, so it all depends. You have to do your due diligence and test out. But I mean, you know where you want to go, right? And you know how you can get there through the training. We just need to understand where are they now, and breaking it down by capability or by function inside of the company is a nice way to do it. A million different ways to do it, I'm sure, but that's the approach that I took.
Okay, I like that idea of testing because I suppose once you've formed these groups from the personas, if you just look at the employees and go, well, actually, they've got very different needs or they've got very different skill sets to begin with, it's probably a bad persona and you need to rethink it. Okay, so I guess related to this, just talking about like groups of learners. Now, learning data skills, it can be a sort of a single player experience, but some people prefer to learn in groups. So I'd like to know if you've made use of the idea of having some kind of community of learners, or whether you put people in cohorts, things like that. Have you experimented with this?
We did experiment with it. Unfortunately, for the global company, it wasn't very. But it was partially useful. So we had a large contingent that was in Spain and Poland, and it worked good for these groups to get together. Whether in Poland or the group that was in Spain, I mean they were throughout Spain, but virtually they could get together, and we could do reviews, right? So um, so that was successful, but initially we tried to do it as a large contingent, and that was not successful at all, and mainly because of time zone differences and holidays and various other things that happen internationally. But that's a great concept, and it does take a lot of resources to do. Not a lot of resources. It does take time to do, to set up these type of trains. But once they get going, if that's part of your pattern of how you're going to train, then it is immensely useful, right? Group training is great, um, and I think people are usually eager to learn. What you don't want to do inside the group training is stifle somebody, right? Because a lot of times people who are more introverted or shy, they attend this group and they don't ask a lot of questions. Um, so it may be useful in that way to understand a little bit more about your students, right? Excuse me. So these individuals, you may want to try to help them, more individually. And depending on the size of the company, it's possible. Depending on the size of your team, it's possible. Um, but our goal here in data literacy is again move the company forward to be data driven. And if there's a person who has great potential and they're attending the events, but they're just very quiet, maybe it's an opportunity to take them off to the side and say, what do you think? How do you think this is going? But I do like the idea of learning in groups. Making it part of that lunch and learn, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I kind of think of it like going to the gym. Like sometimes it's nice to go on my own because, don't have to coordinate with anyone. I can just do my own thing. But sometimes it's nice to have a buddy in order to encourage me to work harder.
Yep. And as a data literacy lead, you have to orchestrate all of that. You have to keep it changing a little bit, right? So it doesn't get stale. It's just like content on somebody's website. After a week, it's old, right? So same thing with data literacy. We want to constantly bring new things to keep it interesting for people. Again, the workshops, group learning. But I do think if there is time, when we when we do data literacy, I see data literacy as part of data governance. And to have these successes in our data literacy program means that we have to have quality data, right? It doesn't mean that we have to have a huge framework for data governance, but we do have to keep that in mind, that data literacy and the success of anything that we do there is dependent on governance, right? Depending on good data, master data, and some of these other things. So it's nice if the data literacy group is working with data governance group to keep that going, right? The worst thing you want to do is get into a workshop and people are like, our data's terrible. We're not going to be able to do anything here, right? And then you spend days or weeks trying to clean that data to get it ready to move forward. It's just very challenging to do. So,
Absolutely. All right, we've got 5 minutes left. I feel like we could chat about this for hours. I love all this stuff. So I've got one more question for you, and then we go to audience questions. For everyone in the audience, please do ask your questions for Ed in the chat. And actually, before I get to my last question, I also want to say we've got 2 more webinars this year. So next week, we've got a code along on Tuesday on exploratory data analysis in Python for beginners. So if you want to get started writing some Python code and analyzing some data, please do come along to that code along Tuesday. On Wednesday, we've got a session on using Snowflake, the data warehousing tool, for modernizing your sales and marketing analytics. So go to datacamp.com/webinars. Please do register for those. I hope to see you next week for those. Now, all right, my last question for you is, so we talked a bit about having different levels of ability for different personas. How do you manage having those different levels of ability? Like, can this be a benefit? Can you have more advanced people mentoring less advanced people? How do you make use of, or how do you deal with these different ability levels?
right. So as you go through that maturity model, and you start to understand who in the organization can be a complement to what you're trying to achieve. You can have, I don't want to say offload, but you can collaborate with them to help the adoption, the personas. Again, everybody learns differently. And having that variety, that variation of how you can learn this is important. Sometimes you need that one-on-one with a person. And we had one lady who wanted to become a data scientist, so that was well past my skill level, but it wasn't past the skill level of the individuals who were already working in data science. I was lucky that 2 of them actually in their PhD programs taught at the university, so it worked out very well to take this individual even further than we could have in some scenarios. And I probably just completely bypassed your question there, but it's for every group, everybody that's on this call, everybody that's going to be listening to this call, your company is going to be a little bit different. So there's a typical pattern that we can do through our tools, but really what comes down to is you got to understand the people, you got to understand what motivates them, and then work towards that. So the company I'm at now, very, very, very different than the company I was at 2 years ago. And what motivates them is completely different. When we talk about defense, we talk about government compliance. So that also skews how we do things. So each company is going to have, it's going to be a different approach, but you got to keep that excitement. There's a couple of good TED Talks, and I wish I had the links to them, that talk about how the brain thinks and the different hormones that are released. And it's good background information to have when you're talking to various individuals, because everybody's motivated differently.
Absolutely. Just bearing in mind people's different motivations is incredibly important. All right, let's go to audience questions. So this one comes from G. Corey saying, I want to be a business analyst. Can I use DataCamp's data analyst track to accomplish that goal? Oh, that's actually a very straightforward answer. Yes, you can. we have I think about 5 different data analyst career tracks. So if you want to be a data analyst, then yeah, absolutely, that's the thing you need to follow. Only one of the questions. So for everyone in the audience who's been a bit shy, we have a no stupid questions policy. Please do ask anything that you're interested in.
So while we're waiting for questions, unless we got
this
one.
comes from Christopher saying, I speak Spanish. How can I follow this course without getting frustrated? Good news for you. DataCamp has recently launched our Spanish curriculum. So our sort of most popular courses are now available in Spanish, and we're building out that curriculum as well. So hopefully long-term, all courses will be in Spanish. So yes, that's possible. And for these webinars, I think if you're following along on YouTube Live, you can get auto-translated captions as well.
Right. And I think inside of DataCamp, all the transcripts can be translated into different languages, which was, one of the key factors for us, because being global, right? But many different languages. So that was a nice feature.
Yes, certainly. All the videos you can get subtitles in. I think it's about 16, 17 different languages at the moment. So yeah, whatever your language, you're covered with the videos. All right. So not getting. Oh, hold on. We got one quick question. One more question from the audience. So Uchebua is asking, I just started a career in data literacy. I love it. What do I need to do to get better at it? Oh yeah. So advice for data literacy professionals. What do you need to do?
So when I first started, it was, and I think we have a slide there, reading and researching and talking to a bunch of different people. And I just went out of, let's see if I can get this better there we go. There are a ton of different books out there, as you can imagine, to help you get started. I did a tremendous amount of reading, TED Talks, Data Camp, going to conferences. The amount of information that's available to you right now is just immense. Even ChatGPT has some good advice. Just be careful that every so often it, has a glitch. so, be careful of that, because it is just reading data. But these are the books that I literally went through when I first started, and they were a tremendous help. Kirkpatrick's 4 levels of training evaluation was huge when it comes to being able to do the assessments and understand, why am I doing these assessments. Effective Data Storytelling was another great book by Brent Dykes, because it didn't go just about the visuals, and we talked about this earlier. It also went into why people think the way they think. And if you're in data literacy, that is going to be a huge advantage if you can understand how to communicate more effectively, not only just in visuals, but in general, when talking with leadership. Different audiences hear things differently. So that communication is critical. The last thing I would probably say is, as being part of data literacy or data literacy lead, again, you have to think of yourself as a small business, and everything is important around that aspect, right? How you market, how you communicate, how you do the training, all very important. So exciting. It's an exciting opportunity, exciting role. Tremendous amount of value can be gained from it. And you want to be able to show that value.
Absolutely. I see on that list of resources, there's a few DataCamp regulars there. So Brent Dykes has done a few webinars with us. Same with Jordan Morrow, both excellent speakers. And yeah, if you go to datacamp.com/resources, you can see, just search for names, you should be able to see the stuff that they've done there. Also, the Kirkpatrick stuff, they're big fans of the Kirkpatrick model at Bloomberg, I know, and the DataCamp admin, Shell Naik, I think he's called, he did a webinar for us as well, and there's a lot of, that goes into the Kirkpatrick model in that. So yeah, dig out the Bloomberg webinar as well. Brilliant. Okay, we are past time now. So I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for all the wisdom there, Ed. I do feel like we could have gone on much longer, but that was brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So yeah, thank you again, Ed. Thank you to Reese for moderating. Thank you to everyone who asked a question. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. Please do go to datacamp.com/webinars and sign up for future sessions. I hope to see you all again soon.